turned to her husband, she said, "Oh, darling, isn't that beautiful? They've sent out a band to welcome us." But as they came down the gangplank, they realised that this welcome home was for the other group who'd been so involved in their drinking and gambling. And when the wife realised this, she said, "Oh, that is so not fair. You know, after all we've been through, we've given up so much to minister to these people." And the husband put his arm around his wife and he very wisely said, "Honey, we're not home yet." And you know, folks, we're not home yet. That's why we need to be loving and forgiving and kind and helpful to one another, because everyone's going through something. Everyone's struggling somewhere in their life. And so, maybe not all the time, but we certainly go through it, don't we? We have seasons and times when we really struggle. And you know, when we do get home, boy, what a day that will be. Can you imagine the joy, the rejoicing, the singing, the laughter, and just the wonderful, awesome presence of God. How beautiful. But we're not home yet. And so we need to encourage each other to keep on, keeping on in this our Christian life. I think some of the biggest difficulties we face in our Christian walk is because we don't always have a really good understanding of God's ways. We know that God's ways are higher than our ways, but sometimes we really think our way would be better. Do you know what I'm talking about? You know, when your prayers aren't being answered, or you've had a word from the Lord and nothing seems to be happening. And yes, that thing will surely come to pass, but it might be 10 years down the track. And God's giving you a glimpse of what He's growing you into. Proverbs 3:5 tells us, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and don't rely on your own understanding." And very often we do rely on our own understanding, don't we? We revert back to how our reasoning is and our thinking and our understanding. And it leads us often into worry or anxiety if we're facing problems. So if we truly trusted the Lord in every situation, we'd never need to worry or be anxious, because we'd know that God has everything under control. That's why the word tells us, trust in the Lord with all your heart, because it's out of the heart relationship with God that we know we come into that discovery of the security and wonderful, safe place of being in the presence of God and one of His family, where He is working on our behalf for good. And He will always give us the wisdom, the strength, the grace, everything we need for whatever situation of life we're in. Now, faith is an active word, isn't it? It's the great fight of faith. And we exercise our faith. We act upon our faith. But this morning I'm talking about trusting God. And trust is active, but we rest in it. Trust is a resting place in God, where we know that we can just trust God because He does have everything under control. Sometimes it can be tricky to know when to get up and get in on the action and when to just sit back and wait patiently for the Lord. You know, that's very hard to do, isn't it? Waiting patiently for God, and just doing nothing can be harder than jumping in and doing whatever we think we should do. But if we're committing all our plans and requests to the Lord continually, then the witness of the Holy Spirit will tell us when to act, when to move, and when to wait for the Lord. Actually, there's a couple of Bible stories we think of in relation to waiting on the Lord, and I guess the classic one is about Joseph, who had prophetic dreams of what God wanted him to do, but then he went through many years of trials and unfair things, really hardships and difficulties, and he really had to just wait on the Lord. And I'm sure there must have been times, just little glimmers, where he thought, did I get it wrong, God? Did I really hear from you? And then there was King David, anointed to be king when he was just a young lad. But he spent years and years fleeing from Saul, hiding out in caves and facing many enemies. And in the Psalms that David wrote, we see just the distress and the torment that he went through in those years. And he must have had moments of wondering, God, did I get it right? You know, you've anointed me to be king, but how can this thing be? And we feel like that sometimes, don't we? When God's spoken into our lives, we have a word from the Lord, or we have that assurance that God's going to bring us into a new place. But everything seems against it, or nothing seems to go right. That's the time to trust and rest in the Lord, isn't it? And just to allow God to work it through, to allow God to work it all out in his time, which is usually longer than what we planned on. Through all the ups and downs of life, the grace of God will hold us steady. And I can say that there have been times in my life, some of the worst times in my life, where the only prayer I could pray was, oh God, hold me steady. And of course he always does. He's a wonderful, wonderful Lord. So the truth is, if you've surrendered your life to the Lord, the grace of God will carry you through every situation of life. He'll sustain you, he'll hold you steady, he'll give you the wisdom you need, the inspiration that you need at the right time, and he'll bring you through it all. But a lot of people look at the what-ifs in life, and then they start to wonder, how will I do it? You know, what if the Lord asked me to give up my life for him, literally? What if I have to die for my faith? What if I have to give up on my dream of being rich, or my dream of getting married or having a family? What if? And we think about the what ifs, and we worry, and we think, well, I don't know how I'll manage. The grace of God will always be there when you need it, won't it? Those of you who've been Christians for years know that. The grace of God is always there when you need it, but it won't be there in advance. So when you're worrying about, oh, what if this happens, or what if that happens, you won't feel the grace of God settling you. In the middle of that, perhaps, that trust comes into play there too, and the peace of God that rules in our hearts. But the grace of God to see you through the situation will only come when you're right in the middle of the battle. It won't come in advance. In 2 Corinthians, you might like to look it up, 2 Corinthians 12, verse 9 and 10, we see that the Lord had once said to Paul, "My grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness." And when Paul is recalling this, he says, "Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest upon me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses." Delight in weaknesses? In insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. "For when I'm weak, then I'm strong." But to delight in those things, that's not an easy place to get to. It's not. However, we do know that God has everything under control, and he can be trusted no matter what happens. When things are going well for us, it's easy for us to trust our own strength and wisdom and think that we sort of have everything we need to get the job done. But how foolish to trust in our own wisdom. Really, we desperately need to be trusting in God for every little situation of life. And even if we think we have the answers. You know, we need to go back to the Lord and say, oh, Father, I need you. I need your wisdom. I need to make sure I'm doing this the right way, saying the right things, handling it right. We need to trust the Lord. And as we consciously put our trust in God for those things, he'll help us through. Every day we have opportunities to choose. Will I trust my own strength and wisdom, or will I trust God who has all strength and wisdom and understanding? You know why I think we tend to trust ourselves? Because actually we know that we have the Holy Spirit undergirding everything we do. We know that. And so we just carry on in life and expecting that he will. But really, God's way in the kingdom is that we ask. So we can't just take it for granted. We can't take for granted that, yes, the Holy Spirit's there and he's going to see me through and he'll give me all the wisdom and everything. We need to ask because that's what God has ordained. And as we ask, we are expressing our reliance, our trust in him. We're expressing that we need him. Otherwise, we're just taking him for granted, I think. So it's a great thing to really ask God in every situation of life. Every one of us struggles with some human weakness. It might just be something as simple as having trouble making friends, or it might be, traffic, there you are. Might be having trouble with negative thinking. Maybe you grew up in a family of negative thinkers and it's hard for you to naturally think positively. You have to train yourself to that. So every one of us has weaknesses or faults that we need to work with in life. And the more consciously that we put our trust in God in all of these things, in every little area, the better and more productive our lives will be. So stop taking God's help and guidance for granted. Yes. So we're going to ask God in every situation of life, whatever your personal struggle is, it is in a sense a gift from God. That sounds funny, doesn't it? Because that very weakness, the frustrating or depressing, distressing problem is the very thing that will cause you to call upon God. It's the very thing that will send you right into the presence of God. And so really it's a gift. It's the thing that makes us get into God's presence and connect because we're desperate. And so it's a wonderful thing to do. I wonder if I got time to tell a story about Hazel. Hazel's, it wasn't exactly a weakness, but Hazel's challenge when she came to the rock was that she was a bit shy and she had trouble making friends. And it took her quite some time and she felt quite alone somehow. Even though people here are very friendly and, you know, she just couldn't seem to feel close in and a part of it. But you know, that weakness was a gift, or that, not really a weakness, but that challenge to Hazel was a great gift from God because it sent her to the Lord. And guess what now? Where her compassion comes, she looks after new people to our church because out of the compassion of her heart, she knows how they must be feeling. And so it became a real gift from God, and what a blessing she is to the church. And so we can look at these things, our challenges, our weaknesses, the things that confront us in a very forceful way. We can look at those things as a gift from God because they send us straight into the presence of God. God is calling on you to call on him. He wants you to rise. He wants you to succeed. He wants you to be all that you can be in God. But he wants you to do it in his strength, not your own. And so let's just thank him for that. We will just pray and finish. And and thank the Lord for all his kindness and goodness.